Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We'll begin the beginning of Parshas Tisa, chapter 30, verse 12. Chapter 30, verse 12, God tells Moshe, Ki Sisa Rosh Bnei Yisrael of Kudehem. When you literally, Sisa means to count or to bear the heads or lift up the heads of the Jewish people by their numbers. V'nasnu ish kofer nasho la'Hashem b'fgodosam. Each person should give an atonement for their soul to God in the counting of them, and they should not have a plague in the counting of them. And this is the famous idea of the machzis hashekel, the half shekel. We actually do a variation on it Purim time, but the basic Torah mitzvah of the half shekel is every Jewish male over the age of 20 would have a mitzvah to give exactly half a shekel. We'll have it in the weekly parsha this week, and in a few weeks' time, it'll be Parsha Shkalim. It'll be one of the special mafters around Purim and Pesach time. But the language of Sisa is a very, very interesting language, and this is not the only time the Torah uses the word Sisa in counting. But it is interesting because if you were to guess, if you didn't know any psukim in the Torah, you probably would not have guessed that this would be the root used for counting. There are other, you see spor, sinad, there could be other things. Sisa literally means to lift. So there's a very nice kliyaka around this pasuk. If you look at the kliyaka around pasuk Yud Aleph, some of yours, it might be registered as Yud Aleph, some of yours Yud Beis. I have sort of like both of them, I think. Ki sisas rosh bnei Yisrael. B'chol makom hizkar nesias rosh eitzel mispar. Every time in the Torah when it talks about counting the Jewish people, it's always this language of sisa, which literally means raising the head. Because through being counted, the Jewish people are being treated in an elevated way by God, more elevated than the other nations of the world. Because every time you take a count, what you're showing is that every single individual included in the count is important. You wouldn't count straw by the piece. You would count straw by the bundle. You would count straw by the weight. But the Jewish people are compared to wheat. So the pasuk in Shir Hashirim seems to say that the very stomach of a Jew is like a bundle of wheat, that a farmer counts out the bundles. And the entity, the body of each and every person is important. Just want to address the obvious question for a moment. This is a beautiful message, but what about the women in all of this? In other words, if the whole message is that every Jew is precious, it'd be nice if the women would be counted. So there's different answers to this question. One answer, the most classic answer, is that one of the functions of the counting was a military census. And certainly in those times, it was only the men who participated in military activities. And now the way in which we're counting is emphasizing the value of every person. That's one answer. That's probably the most correct answer. Another possibility is just the whole dynamic. Again, I think if, you could also make the argument that if this was happening today, women would be counted as much as men. For the social norms of the time, women were much more in the home. That was just, not out in public. And so that was just much more the social norm of the time. This is not, this is being given as a mitzvah for the moment of how the Jewish people should be counted. So I think those are at least some possibilities, but the question is certainly a fair and an important question. But the bottom line is, what the Kli Yakar is saying is that the language of raising the head is very appropriate for counting, because what we're really showing by counting them by individuals and not by family and not by tribe is that every person is important to God. In mine, I would skip the next paragraph. It might be, if you don't have it laid out as I do, maybe it's the next 10 or 15 lines. Skipping to B'derech zeh. U'b'derech zeh nimshulu Yisrael l'kochavim. The Jewish people are also compared to stars. Shenemar bohem hamotzi b'mispar tzva'am. It says about the stars that God brings out their legions in number. Ki misparohu vaday hu va'avur ma'alasam. Ki bli safek she'HaKadosh Baruch Hu yodea misparam. The reason why God would know the number of stars is because each star is important, each star is special. Kach mispar b'nei Yisrael achar masa ha'egel domel ma'shenemar achar chet shel Ruvain vayuvnei Yaakov shnei mosar. Now the Kli Yakar makes a separate point. The timing here is extremely important. This story of counting the Jewish people is juxtaposed to the story of the sin of the golden calf. And the juxtaposition, which it's a whole question, what the sequence is of all this. The Mepharshim say very different things as the sequence. But the bottom line is, let's just focus on the juxtaposition. The juxtaposition is to say that even though the Jewish people did sin, will sin, whatever it is, the message is that they're still precious in God's eyes. And actually, the Kli Yakar brings a very interesting example. There was a very famous sinful act by Reuven. It was considered disrespectful to his father when he switched his father's beds. And there's sort of an allusion to it in the Torah. And then right afterwards, it says, Vayuvnei Yaakov shnei masar. Yaakov had 12 sons. And what that teaches is even after the sin, Reuven is still considered part of the group. Reuven is still considered a valuable member of the family. And therefore, here too, even though we're about to segue into the famous story of one of the gravest sins, if not the gravest sin in the history of the Jewish people, there's still a value on each and every member of Klal Yisrael. It's also so too it's being conveyed to us here. They're not being disgraced because of the sin with the golden calf. The message of the number is not only that we're important, but that God is actively interested in each of us, and God is interested in making whatever needs to happen in our lives so that we can do what we need to do. Okay, fine. Let's move on now to chapter 31, verse 2. Chapter 31, verse 2. God says to Moshe, Re'ei karasi b'shem, see that I have called by name, B'tzalel ben Uri ben Hur l'matei Yehuda. See, I have commissioned B'tzalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, from the tribe, the grandson of Hur, from the tribe of Yehuda. Verse 3, V'amaleo so ruach Elokim, and I filled him with the divine spirit, Chachmav, Sfuna, B'das, V'chom b'lacha, to know all kinds of things. B'tzalel would be the, for lack of a better term, the foreman of the activities of the building of the Mishkan. And clearly God is saying that he has been imbued with remarkable talents and he is the one for the job. The very obvious question on this pasuk is, why is the verb here see? Shouldn't the verb be here? God says to Moshe, see that I've designated B'tzalel for the following task. He's not seeing that God designated B'tzalel. He's hearing the words from God that God designated B'tzalel. Look at the Ramban on Pasuk Beis. Re'ei karasi b'shem B'tzalel ben Uri ben Hur. Amar Hashem l'Moshe. Re'ei karasi b'shem. God says to Moshe, see that I've called by name. Moshe Amar Yisrael Re'u karasha b'shem. By the way, Moshe conveys the message to the Jewish people in the same language. Moshe needs to have a press conference to tell the Jewish people that B'tzalel is in charge. So he also says, see that B'tzalel has been designated by God. Vatam ki Yisrael b'Mitzrayim pruchim b'avodas chomer uveinim. The Jewish people in Egypt worked hard with mortar and bricks. Lo lamdum leches kesef v'zav v'charoshes avonim tovos v'lo ro'osam klal. What did they know from gold and silver and woodworking and nice and working on nice stones? What did they know from these things? Vinehu pella, it's a wondrous thing. What in the world are the odds that there be one person who knows how to do all this stuff, who's expert at all this stuff? Even if people have a lot of work experience, you would assume this one works with gold and this one works with wool and this one, but that one person is indeed a jack of all trades. Would you really think so? And the Ramban also just says the nature of the physical labor that they were involved with was kind of coarse kind of deeds with their hands, tasks with their hands, and now they're doing very finite things. It's like a whole different skill set, it's a whole different knowledge set. And not only that, not only did he do all these amazing things with his hands, he was brilliant. Love and Soda Mishkan, he understood with wisdom the secret meanings of the Mishkan. And he understood, because that presumably is what's conveyed by the messaging of that he's a person of chachma, of wisdom. He must have understood the deeper meaning of the vessels and what they allude to. So therefore, God isn't just saying to Moshe, listen up. God is saying to Moshe, I want you to see this wondrous thing. V'yeda, and Moshe should know, that God filled Bezalel with the Spirit, with the divine Spirit, Lodas kol ele bavur sheyaseh Mishkan, to know all of this so that he'd be able to do the Mishkan. Ki hayaratzah l'fanav lasas Mishkan b'midbar, because God wanted there to be this Mishkan in the desert, v'lichvodo b'ra'o, and God created this whole scenario to bring greater honor to God. This is all part of God's divine plan, and part of having this beautiful Mishkan that would cement the bond between the Jewish people and God in the desert was to have a remarkably talented and brilliant individual, and don't focus on the statistical chances of such a thing happening. I'm telling you, he's here, and notice it. And I think the point, according to the Ramban, he's sort of alluding to it, is that not only should you and all the Jewish people respect Bezalel for his authority granted by God and his remarkable abilities, but you should also just take a step back and recognize how clearly this was so much in the plan for long before you ever left Egypt, that God would have this human being who had all of these abilities. Notice it. Understand that the same way it's remarkable that there be a person with these abilities, and obviously it's part of God's plan, you're all part of God's plan. And you have a great schus to participate in such a thing. Rabbeinu Bozeh Medrash. Now the Ramban cites a very interesting Medrash. Hera oso sifro shel Adam Arishon. So there's a Medrash that says, you know why it says see? Because it wasn't just that God was talking to Moshe, but he showed him a book back to the times of Adam, the Amar Lo, and he said to him, Kol echad hiskantiv me'osa shah. I sort of made special arrangements for people from that time, from the beginning of humanity. V'af Bezalel me'osa shah hiskanti oso. Look in the book from the creation of Adam and Chava. It says great people through the generations, and look over here, page 17b, Bezalel's there. Shenema re'ei karasi v'shem. And that's what it means, that see, that I've called the name. So it's a very interesting idea. So we discussed this morning the significance of why the language used for counting is a language of lifting. And we discussed the Ramban's ideas about why it would say see that I've called Bezalel to have this task.